Clara Whitlock, the unquestioned queen of Grafton, laughed at the silent Apache and flipped a coin toward him. "This town doesn't need your kind." Not long after the town itself would be tested. She stumbled, panic seizing her chest. "No. My God, no." The man she had dismissed, quiet, unreadable, began to rise, something dangerous awakening beneath his calm. A buried past stirred. What followed would etch his name into the desert forever. It began on a blistering afternoon as Clara stepped down from her carriage-polished wood, gleaming beneath the merciless sun. Her eyes, so often sweeping the street with ownership and disdain, caught on a solitary figure. He sat beneath the thin shade of the general store's overhang, an Apache man in his early 30s. His clothes were worn, sun-faded, like old canyon stone, stretched over a body shaped by endurance, not poverty. He did not move, not. His gaze rested somewhere beyond the dust-heavy horizon. That stillness to Clara, trapped within wealth and ignorance, looked like weakness, like idleness. To her, he was nothing more than a vagrant, a blemish on what she considered her town. A sharp scoff escaped her, loud enough to carry down Main Street. She reached into her purse and drew out a single silver coin. With a careless flick, she tossed it into the dirt at his feet. The thin metallic sound of silver striking dry ground froze the street. "Grafton would be better off," Clara declared coldly, "without your kind cluttering my view." Her words lingered heavy with privilege and effortless cruelty. What Clara Whitlock did not understand, what she could not see, was the reverent fear every other soul in Grafton felt for the man she had insulted. They knew his silence was not submission. It was control, deadly, deliberate restraint. He was no drifter. He was Naru, a name whispered across the frontier. A former scout, a man once known as the Desert Shadow. Without exaggeration, he was the most dangerous man for 100 miles in any direction. It was a truth Clara, blinded by arrogance, had catastrophically overlooked. As the coin glinted in the dust, Naru did not flinch. He did not look down. His dark eyes that had seen blood, justice, and survival, remained fixed where desert met sky. The town held its breath. Every settler understood what Clara had done. She had mocked the one presence that kept chaos from spilling into their streets, mistaking a predator's calm for weakness. Her empire, built on money and entitlement, was about to face a trial no fortune could buy off. And it would come with the setting sun. As the sky burned orange and purple, a tremor rolled through the ground. It grew louder, heavier. Hooves, many hooves. In the Utah frontier, that sound never meant mercy. Clara, still wrapped in her indignation, felt something crack, not the earth, but her confidence. The Grafton settlers exchanged looks of pure terror, eyes darting between the rising dust cloud and the unmoving figure of Naru. No wall of money could stop what was coming. The distant rumble became a roar. Hooves and shouts shattered the fragile calm as the sun vanished below the horizon. Main Street fell into a twilight born not of night but of fear. Dust exploded into the air as riders thundered in, blotting out the last gold of daylight. The air thickened with panic gun oil and violence. Into the chaos rode Boone and his ruthless crew, Boone's Riders, a name spoken only in whispers across the territory. Boone led them, scars carving his face into something feral. His men spread fast-hardened outlaws, shouting as they surged through the street, their voices echoing off wooden storefronts. Everyone knew their target, the Whitlock safe, the vault that symbolized Clara's power, her illusion of control. Grafton erupted. Women screamed. Children cried. Men dove for cover. The sense of security Clara's wealth had promised shattered instantly. Her hired guards, loud when paid, fearless, only on paper broke at the first gunshot. They fled without hesitation, vanishing into alleys and saloons, abandoning Clara and the town alike. Moments ago, untouchable Clara Whitlock now stood exposed at the heart of the storm she had summoned. Her silk dress, once proof of her untouchable standing, turned against her as she stumbled boots, slipping on uneven ground. Screams, gunfire, and the pounding thunder of hooves crashed over her senses in a brutal, deafening chorus. Clara Whitlock was no longer the ruler of Grafton. She was just a woman, now, terrified, trapped, and powerless in the very street where she had once ruled with ease. Her guards were gone. Her money, her greatest shield, proved useless against raw steel and flying lead. She dropped to her knees, dust staining the fine fabric of her gown, manicured fingers locking together in a wordless plea. That plea was not lifted to heaven, but toward the men closing in on her, their faces twisted with cruel satisfaction. She begged, her voice breaking as the air thickened with gunpowder sharp and metallic in her throat. Lanterns flared to life, throwing wild, flickering shadows that turned men into monsters. Clara's world collapsed into a tight, suffocating ring of violence. Every scream, every gunshot, every mocking laugh drove the truth deeper. Her wealth, her name, her status, all of it meant nothing here. She was stripped bare of power, reduced to the weakness she had once mocked in others. Her empire didn't fall gracefully. It tore itself apart, ugly and unforgiving. And then amid the chaos, something shifted. A shadow moved. Naru, who had remained still as stone through her insult, rose. His motion was calm, unhurried, smooth in a way that made the skin crawl. It was not desperation that lifted him, but certainty. It was the slow awakening of something inevitable. The Grafton settlers, hiding behind barrels and doorways, caught sight of him and froze. Their terror did not vanish. It transformed. Fear gave way to something sharper, edged with fragile hope. They knew what was coming. They had heard the stories. They had seen hints of it before. He did not run. He walked, straight toward the danger. Toward the center of the storm, everyone else fled. There was no speech, no heroic display, only the quiet precision of a warrior stepping into his purpose. Against the firelit wreck of an overturned wagon, his silhouette seemed to stretch, absorbing the fading light, less a man now than a living force. With each step, the air grew heavier, thick with inevitability. He crossed out of the general store's shadow and into the street. The first outlaw, a broad brute with a drawn pistol, turned toward him. The sneer on the man's face faltered. Confusion flashed. Then recognition. Then fear. A mistake had been made. A fatal one. Naru, the desert shadow, had stepped fully into the open, and Grafton was about to witness the truth. The dance of death began, and Naru alone set its rhythm. The bandit called Rook, infamous for his strength and cruelty, raised his pistol with a slow grin. He saw only one Apache, an obstacle. Before his finger tightened, motion blurred the air. Naru struck with the speed of a desert predator. Rook's pistol vanished from his grip, spinning, end over end, before landing in the dirt with a dull thud. An instant later, a precise blow to the temple dropped him, cold, his body hitting the ground before he could even understand what had happened. The storefront, once a place of stillness, became a stage for awakening terror. The remaining outlaws froze. Their laughter died. Silence spread as they stared at Rook's unmoving form. Unease rippled through them. This was no frightened settler, no fleeing guard. This was something else. Their greedy confidence cracked, replaced by darting eyes and tightening throats. Clara Whitlock, still kneeling in the dirt, watched with trembling disbelief. The hush, broken only by distant flames and ragged breaths, felt heavier than the chaos before it. Fear and awe tangled in her gaze as it locked onto Naru, the man she had scorned, the man she had dismissed as refuse. He was not a vagrant. He was a force. Naru did not speak. He moved. From shadow into firelight, a silent phantom threading through the violence, letting actions speak where words never could. A bandit trying to circle behind him suddenly lost his weapon. The rifle clattered into the dirt as a sharp driving kick sent the man crashing into another body's, colliding in a chain of confusion. A second outlaw rushed in, blade flashing. Naru caught him mid-lunge. Bone ground against bone as the man's wrist twisted hard, the knife slipping uselessly from numb fingers. Naru's movements were spare, ruthless, and devastatingly precise. He turned their momentum against them, using whatever the street offered: a loose wagon wheel, stacked barrels, anything that could become cover or a weapon. His hands became streaks of motion, striking stripping weapons away, dropping men with a quiet focus that spoke of battles survived and enemies finished. From horseback at the far end of the street, Boone narrowed his eyes. He had heard the whispers, the stories of the desert shadow. He had laughed them off as frontier exaggeration, campfire nonsense spun by frightened men. But now, watching Naru move, Boone felt something cold twist in his gut. This was no legend. This was real. He shouted orders, a voice raw, commanding his riders to spread out, to overwhelm him with numbers. But fear had already begun to rot his ranks from the inside. As Naru disarmed another man, snapping a rifle stock clean across his knee, Clara Whitlock stared in stunned silence. She was no longer watching a fighter. She was witnessing a living legend. The memory of her cruel words, the silver coin tossed in contempt, burned through her with searing shame. She had judged him by silence, by worn clothes, by skin, and in doing so had failed to see the lethal depth beneath. The truth struck hard. This was not only his power on display, but her own staggering blindness. A bullet sliced past Naru, grazing his arm. He didn't react. His focus never wavered. His eyes, dark and unyielding, reflected the chaos like polished stone. He moved in shifting angles, never predictable, always forcing the outlaws to lose footing, to guess wrong. He knew their tricks, their habits, their fear. He had hunted men like Boone across deserts and canyons for years. His name had been forged in dust, blood, and survival. Then it happened. A young boy, no more than 10, broke from behind an overturned wagon, reaching desperately toward the general store where his mother was trapped. One of Boone's riders, spotting an easy target, raised his gun with a cruel grin. Naru saw it. Without hesitation, he abandoned his strike, something fierce and protective flashing across his usually unreadable face. In a heartbeat, he crossed the distance, placing himself between the child and the gun. The shot cracked. Pain tore into his shoulder. He absorbed it with a grunt. His eyes never left the shooter. A savage blow dropped the man instantly. Naru then turned, steadying the shaking boy and guiding him into the darkness of a doorway away from the gunfire. The Grafton settlers saw it. So did the outlaws. Understanding spread. This was no fight for gold, no defense of a safe or a town ledger. This was something older, deeper, a code that valued life above pride or profit. Watching him, Clara felt something shift inside her, unsettling and irreversible. The man she had tried to reduce was rising with every selfless act, growing beyond fear, beyond myth. Boone watched his men fall, saw the tide turning, and knew he had made a fatal miscalculation. Fury burned in his eyes, but so did reluctant respect. This was no raid anymore. It was a war, and he was losing. Continuing meant death. He saw it clearly now. Retreat was the only path left, but not without one last gamble. Boone raised his pistol, not at Naru, but at Clara Whitlock. "Drop it, Apache!" he snarled, voice tight with desperation. "Or she dies." The street froze. Smoke hung heavy in the air as Boone's gun leveled at Clara's head. Her face drained of color. Dust streaked across her skin, terror flooding her eyes. The balance shifted in an instant. Now Naru faced the choice, hers or his. Silence followed, thick and absolute, broken only by shallow breaths and a nervous horse's whine. Every gaze, settlers and outlaws alike locked onto Naru. This was the moment. The quiet guardian stood unmoving, his face carved from control, revealing nothing. Yet everything waited on what he would choose. His dark eyes flickered once, weighing the choice, calculating the cost. Pain pulsed from the bullet lodged in his shoulder, a burning reminder of the life he had shielded moments earlier. It slowed nothing. Naru knew Boone was a man who kept his promises when cruelty was involved. For all her flaws, Clara Whitlock was innocent in this moment. To abandon her would violate a deeper law, one carved into his spirit, long before this night, a code that placed the value of life above pride, above vengeance, above names. With deliberate calm, Naru lowered his hands. The bowie knife he had taken from a fallen rider slipped from his grip and struck the dirt with a sharp, final sound. It echoed through the frozen street. A gasp swept the onlookers. Had the desert shadow yielded? Had Boone finally broken him? A flash of triumph crossed Boone's scarred face. His grin twisted, savoring victory clawed back from ruin. But Naru's gaze held no surrender. It held resolve. Slowly he raised his hands again, not in defeat, but in a way that drew Boone's full attention. A calculated offering. Boone, tasting success, shifted his focus from Clara to Naru, drinking in what he believed was submission. That moment cost him everything. In the narrow space between Boone's arrogance and his delayed reaction, Naru moved. Not with a charge, not with force, with precision. His body coiled and released motion, blurring beyond sight. His hands still lifted, became weapons. A subtle snap of the wrist sent a pebble, tearing free from the dirt, launched with terrifying force. The stone struck Boone's gun hand like a fired round. Boone cried out as pain exploded through his fingers. His grip failed. The pistol jerked skyward and discharged uselessly into the night. Naru closed the distance instantly. He did not punch. He did not kick. He struck with knowledge, pressure points learned through years of tracking and ending fights without killing. A brutal blow to Boone's forearm sent lightning through the limb, deadening it. The pistol dropped. Boone roared, rage and pain tangled together. Before he could recover, Naru unleashed a rapid series of precise strikes, dismantling Boone's balance and strength. The outlaw leader pitched from his saddle and hit the ground hard, collapsing like dead weight. The fight left him. Around them, the remaining Boone's riders stared in disbelief. Their leader, feared across the territory, had fallen to bare hands and a scrap of stone. Terror replaced greed. Pride shattered. With a broken cry, they turned and fled, horses thundering back into the black wilderness, swallowed by darkness. Silence fell over Grafton. It was complete, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing and Naru's measured steps as he retrieved his knife. The violence had ended as suddenly as it began, leaving gun smoke hanging in the air like a memory of something impossible. Clara Whitlock remained on the ground, staring at him. Her mind struggled to reconcile the man she had mocked with the warrior who had crushed an entire gang alone. Her arrogance lay in ruins, replaced by a raw understanding of her own fragility and of the quiet power she had failed to see. He had saved her life, not with fury, but with mastery beyond brute force. The man she had dismissed revealed a depth of strength and principle she had never encountered. The world she believed ruled by wealth had shattered completely. Dust drifted down as Grafton exhaled. Shouts and gunfire faded into an uneasy calm, marked only by distant hoofbeats and shaken breaths. Clara remained kneeling. Her fine dress ruined, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her heart still racing. Boone's pistol aimed at her head burned in her memory. But stronger still was the image of Naru, silent and unstoppable, turning death aside with a pebble. As the Grafton settlers slowly emerged, they looked upon him with awe and fear, knowing they had witnessed something far greater than a man. They had always held a quiet respect for him, aware of his unspoken reputation. But witnessing such controlled surgical power firsthand was something else entirely. He stood amid the wreckage with Boone unconscious at his feet, blood seeping from his shoulder, yet his posture was as steady as if he were watching the sun dip behind the hills. There were no shouts of victory, no swagger, only a grounded, resolute calm. Clara Whitlock slowly pushed herself upright, her legs stiff, her hands shaking. Relief washed over her first, then shame followed hard and fast. The man she had mocked, the one she had humiliated in public, had just saved her life. He had placed himself between her and death, taken a bullet meant for a child, then faced down a ruthless gang leader with nothing but judgment, discipline, and a skill that felt almost unreal. In the span of an hour, the world she had built on wealth and status had collapsed. Power, she realized with a hollow ache, was not measured in gold, but in courage and principle. As Naru bent to retrieve his Bowie knife from the dust, moving with the same fluid control despite his wound, Clara found her voice. It came out rough, barely more than a breath. "Thank you." The words felt foreign, unused, especially spoken to someone she had treated with such contempt. He answered with a small nod, a subtle tilt of his head. Their eyes met for an instant. She saw no judgment there, no triumph, only a quiet understanding, an acknowledgement of fear of humanity, of duty fulfilled. He turned away to scan the street, measuring damage, confirming there were no lingering threats. The remaining riders who could still move were already disappearing into the night. Naru drew a long, steady breath, as if setting the violence aside like a heavy coat. He knelt by Boone, binding hands and feet with a length of rope pulled from a nearby hitching post, ensuring escape was no longer possible. As he secured the knots, something caught his eye, something small, wrong in its place, yet unmistakable to him. Clutched tight in Boone's unconscious hand was a tiny wooden bird, no larger than a thumb. It didn't fit a hardened outlaw. It wasn't the sort of thing a man risked carrying into a raid. It felt out of place. Carefully, Naru pried the carving free. The smooth, worn wood rested against his palm, and recognition washed over him, quiet, undeniable. He knew this piece. It was an Apache peace symbol. A specific style, old, crafted before expansion swallowed the desert. More than that, it was identical to a carving his own grandfather Toma had made down to the intricate knot in the tail feathers. A family mark, a signature passed down. This was no trinket. It was his heritage. As Naru studied the bird, a chill ran through him, nothing to do with the night air. The truth struck with the weight of a blow. Boone, the man who had terrorized Grafton, the ruthless bandit leader, was not a stranger. He was Naru's brother. Years ago, his parents had welcomed twins into the world. One, Naru, was raised within the ways of his people. The other had been taken during a raid when they were infants, presumed lost, forever carried off, and raised among settlers, shaped into the very thing Naru had spent his life opposing. What had come to Grafton was not chance. It was blood colliding with blood. The deepest wound of his life, the loss of his twin, had returned not as memory, but as the enemy he had just defeated. A flash of shock crossed Naru's face before he buried it deep. The man bound at his feet was not only an outlaw, he was family. The bravery, the sacrifice, the protection he had shown now carried an unbearable weight. He had stopped a threat, but he had also broken his own bloodline. Clara noticed the change, a tightening barely visible but real. She didn't understand it yet. She felt it. He was no longer only the silent guardian. He was a man facing a storm within. As the Grafton settlers began to approach, offering hushed thanks and wary admiration, Naru said nothing. He stared at the wooden bird in his hand, his gaze distant, haunted. He had saved Grafton, but the cost was something no one there could measure. The praise faded into a dull echo as he held the carving, a silent witness to a fate far more tangled and tragic than any of them could know. His greatest act of heroism had delivered his deepest heartbreak. In the aftermath, relief mixed with disbelief. As townsfolk emerged from hiding, the air filled with whispered retellings of Naru's impossible feats, stories already turning to legend. He had become in the span of a single harrowing hour more than Grafton's quiet guardian. He was now a living legend, his deeds already fixing his name into the town's memory. Yet amid the uneasy praise and whispered excitement, Naru stood apart. His eyes were distant, his thoughts far from admiration. The small wooden bird, barely visible in his closed hand, carried a weight no words could touch, a truth too raw to share. Clara Whitlock, however, no longer regarded him from afar with awe alone. What she had endured on that dust-choked street had cracked the brittle shell of her pride, leaving her exposed. She noticed the blood darkening his worn shirt, the wound at his shoulder, and felt something unfamiliar take hold, real concern. "You're hurt," she said, her voice softer than anyone in Grafton had ever heard it. She stepped closer, not with the command of a benefactor, but with the cautious approach of someone offering help. Naru nodded once. His eyes stayed distant, yet he did not pull away as she examined the injury. He moved like a man long used to tending his own wounds, but he allowed her touch. It was a quiet moment, a fragile bridge forming between two worlds that had collided in violence. She saw the clean puncture the raw flesh and shivered. "Come," she said, a steadiness entering her voice. "You need proper care. You'll come to my house." It was an order, but one born of concern rather than contempt. And so for the first time Naru crossed the threshold of the Whitlock home. The contrast was stark plush carpets where there had been dust-glittering chandeliers. Instead of stars, the scent of perfume mingling with gunpowder still clinging to his clothes. Clara moved quickly, directing hesitant servants to fetch warm water, clean cloth, and herbs. A sharp glance silenced their questions. As she cleaned the wound, her hands gentle and precise, a tentative silence settled between them. The tension born of difference and cruelty began to loosen, replaced by something fragile and new. Naru watched her with calm attention, not suspicion, but measured curiosity. She found herself drawn to his stillness, the strength that remained even in pain. The lines at his eyes, the scars on his hands, spoke of a life far removed from Grafton's sheltered halls. She spoke quietly, not of the raid, but of herself. "I behaved unforgivably earlier," she admitted, her voice low, eyes fixed on the bandage. "I judged you. I was wrong." The words were difficult, raw, a dismantling of the mask she had worn for years. Naru listened. His expression did not change, but his shoulders eased slightly. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady. "We all wear masks," he said, "some for power, some for fear, some to survive." He spoke then of the desert, of tracking under endless skies, of the land's harsh beauty, and the bond his people shared with it. Not stories meant to impress, just quiet truths. Clara listened, truly listened, for the first time in her life. The world he described held value beyond wealth, beyond status. As the night wore on and dawn brushed the sky with pale light, something settled between them. Not love, not yet, but respect, recognition. He was wilderness unyielding and honest. She was civilization ornate and fragile. In that room they found common ground, forged through chaos and the quiet act of healing. Then came the final revelation. As Clara secured a fresh bandage, her gaze drifted to the wooden bird Naru had set on the table. She froze. Slowly she picked it up, tracing the carved knots along the tail feathers. "This," she said, her voice shaking, "is exactly like one my family kept." She swallowed. "My mother, Margaret Whitlock, said it belonged to her adopted son, a boy taken by raiders, as an infant found years later. My half-brother." Naru's eyes snapped to hers. The room seemed to tighten around them as understanding crashed into place. The carving, his family's mark, linked not only to his lost twin, but to her blood as well. Boone, the man he had defeated, was not only his brother, he was hers. Their lives' blood, fate, and history had been bound together long before the raid, before insults or heroics. The violence had merely unearthed a secret buried deep and long ignored. What stood between them now was not chance, but a shared legacy complex, devastating and impossible to deny. Just as the weight of that shattering truth began to settle between them, the front door exploded with frantic pounding. The sound tore through the quiet mansion like a gunshot. A voice ragged with panic shouted from outside. "Miss Whitlock, it's the sheriff. They're back, another gang, and they've set the livery stable on fire." The fragile stillness shattered. A new terror, sharper and more insidious than before, rolled through Grafton. The fight for the town and for the twisted fate binding them together was far from finished. The pounding echoed again, splintering the pale calm of dawn and ripping away the moment of revelation that had bound Naru and Clara Whitlock in something dangerous and undeniable. The message carried by Cole Harlan's voice was brutal in its clarity. The threat had returned bolder, crueler. A new gang. Whether allies of Boone or opportunists drawn by blood and chaos hardly mattered. They announced themselves by fire. The livery stable burned flames clawing at the sky, a signal of renewed destruction. The brief calm vanished. Adrenaline surged. Fear tightened its grip. Naru rose despite the ache in his shoulder, his movements quick and deliberate. The truth about Boone, his brother and Clara's half-brother, added a weight he had never imagined carrying. Still, there was no hesitation. He secured his knife, his face settling into a hard, focused resolve. Clara watched him, her concern raw and unhidden. "You're wounded," she protested, urgency breaking through her voice. "You can't face this again." "Not alone." He met her gaze without wavering. "Grafton is my home," he said quietly, "and now it's yours too. I protect what is mine." The words were simple, but they carried the force of a vow. There would be time for truths later. Not now. Not with fire in the streets. When they stepped outside, the town was already drowning in fear again. Smoke rolled thick from the livery stable flames, licking the morning sky and painting the Grafton settlers' faces in orange and terror. This gang was different, more organized, more ruthless. Led by a woman known only as Mara. She rode a black mare straight through the chaos, long leather duster, snapping behind her, twin pistols gleaming in her hands. Her voice cracked like a whip as she barked orders, her crew moving with brutal precision, cutting off escape, seizing ground. This wasn't a robbery, it was domination. Mara had heard the whispers of the desert shadow. She dismissed them as frontier nonsense. No man, she believed, stood against her crew. She was wrong. Naru did not rush her. He moved sideways through the smoke and shadow, reading the battlefield. His strength was not only violence, it was strategy, flow, terrain. He spoke to the settlers, not shouting, not commanding, but urgently, clearly. He pointed out cover, directed barricades, told them how to protect their families, not how to be heroes. Clara felt something ignite inside her. She stepped forward, her voice once sharp with scorn, now cutting through panic. "Listen to him," she shouted. "He saved us once. He will again." Memory carried her words. Fear loosened its grip. A few men moved. Then more, not soldiers, not warriors, but people defending their own. The resistance formed, clumsy, desperate, but real. Mara's crew met something they hadn't expected. Pushback. Naru moved through it all, despite the wound, disarming, striking, disabling. He guided the settlers to fight smart, not bravely. Dust to blind, tools as weapons, survival over pride. Then he faced her. Mara reined her horse, hard pistols, rising her eyes, cold and sharp. "So you're the Apache ghost," she sneered. "Let's see if ghosts bleed." She fired twice. Naru dropped instantly, bullets slicing harmlessly through the air above him. Before she could fire again, his hand snapped forward. A shard of gravel flew, true, slamming into her gun hand. Mara cried out, her grip failing, aim shattered, her confidence cracking for the first time as the fight shifted once more. Just as Naru shifted to finish her, another shape pushed through the smoke and stepped directly between them. It was Boone. His wrists were still bound, rope cutting into flesh, his face drawn tight with pain and fury. Somehow he had torn himself free from where he'd been held. His eyes burned now with something volatile, hatred, tangled with desperate urgency. Naru Boone shouted, his voice ragged. "Leave her. This isn't on her." The words hit like a gunshot. The man who had terrorized Grafton, the ruthless outlaw, was now shielding Mara from his own brother. The battlefield seemed to stall. Even the fire hesitated. Mara's gaze flicked to Boone, and for the briefest instant the iron in her eyes softened. Something deeper surfaced, something far beyond shared violence. Boone lunged, throwing himself into her path, dragging her clear of Naru's blade. The knife meant for her glanced across Boone's side instead, drawing blood. The motion froze everything. Guns lowered, breath caught. Boone staggered, clutching his wound, and looked at Naru with naked desperation. "She's my wife," he gasped. "My brother. This is her revenge." He jerked his chin toward the Whitlock mansion. "For what was done to our people, to our child." The words struck Naru like a blow to the chest. A wife. A child. This wasn't greed. It wasn't random bloodshed. This was vengeance, personal, deliberate, born of loss. Mara was no mere raider. She was Boone's wife, bound to him by grief and fury. Her war carved from something far older than Grafton. The fight was no longer simple. It was history coming due. Naru reeled, not outwardly, but inside, caught between the revelation of his brother's life and the truth of this assault. He could strike now, end it, protect the town. Or he could step back and face the deeper wound, the reason this violence had come calling. He looked toward Clara Whitlock. Her face mirrored his turmoil, confusion, fear dawning, understanding. Then back to Boone, whose eyes pleaded not for victory, but for recognition. Naru knew then he could not defeat this with force. He had to understand it, even if it cost him everything. With a decision that tore at his instincts, Naru let his knife fall. It hit the dirt with a sharp final sound, an unmistakable declaration. He had disarmed himself. The protector chose vulnerability. The street went dead still. Fighting stopped as if cut by a blade. Grafton settlers stared in disbelief. Mara's crew froze, weapons half raised, unsure. Their enemy, their most dangerous obstacle, stood unarmed before them. From behind a makeshift barricade, Clara gasped. She understood the risk immediately. Naru had placed his life in the hands of those who wanted him dead. Fear clenched her chest, but beneath it stirred something else. Respect. Mara stared at him. Boone still partly shielding her. She had expected blood, resistance, defiance. Not this. Boone glanced between his wife and his brother. Pain etched deep into his face, silently begging her to listen. Naru lifted his empty hands, palms open. His voice was calm, but it carried. "I didn't know," he said. "Not about your child. Not about your pain. Tell me." The words weren't a plea alone. They were a challenge to speak, to face what had been buried. Mara hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the triggers. Rage wavered under the weight of his exposure and Boone's stare. "He's our brother," Boone rasped. "My twin." He didn't know. The truth settled heavy and unforgiving. Mara's eyes widened, shock rippling through the fury that had driven her this far. She looked at Naru, really looked, and saw it. The shared lines. The same stillness. The same fire held in check. The hatred cracked. Slowly, reluctantly, Mara lowered her pistols. She spoke at last, her voice stripped raw by grief. "Years ago," Mara said, "your half-sister, Clara Whitlock's mother, drove my people from our land, from my family's land." Her words cut through the smoke-heavy air. She used money and influence to force us out, to take what was never hers. And in that chaos, my child, our child, she corrected quietly, glancing at Boone, was lost. We were told he was dead. Another casualty of her greed. Hidden behind the barricade, Clara felt cold dread coil in her stomach. The woman she had revered, Margaret Whitlock, whose name anchored her inheritance, stood revealed as the true source of the storm. The Whitlock fortune, the bedrock of her pride, was stained with dispossession and blood, a legacy stretching back generations. The name she had spoken with reverence was the architect of this misery. Naru listened without interruption. His face remained still, but the pieces locked together in his mind. His people driven from their land, Boone torn from his family, Mara losing her child, and at the center of it all, the Whitlock name. What had come to Grafton was not random violence, but a reckoning born of stolen land and broken families. Clara stepped fully into the open, her face pale with realization. "It was my mother," she whispered. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Mara's gaze settled on her, emptied now of fury. She saw not an arrogant heiress, but a woman, crushed by the truth. The real enemy, she understood, was not the person before her, but the inheritance of greed and power, passed down without question. In the hush that followed, Naru stepped forward, not with strength, but with wisdom. "The past can't be undone," he said calmly. "But the future can be rebuilt, not with blood, but with justice." He looked to Boone, then to Mara. "What ends this without creating more graves?" Mara glanced at her exhausted crew faces, once hard now, drawn with confusion and weariness. She looked at the burning livery stable, at the terrified Grafton settlers, and finally at Naru, unarmed, offering a way out. The true defeat, she realized, would be to keep feeding a cycle that had already devoured too much. His vulnerability broke through her armor. She turned to her people. "Enough," she said softly. "We ride out. This ends here." Stunned but obedient, Mara's crew gathered their horses. The tension bled from the street as the firelight dimmed. Boone, bruised and bound, met Naru's eyes. Gratitude and something like peace flickered there. He had found his brother, and with him a chance at a different path. As Mara mounted, she paused. "You speak of justice," she said. "But what of the child, the lost one? What of all the children taken by greed?" With a final look, heavy with unresolved pain, she wheeled her horse and vanished into the pre-dawn dark, her riders following. Grafton stood, scarred but standing. The clash had ended. Yet one wound remained open, the missing child Eli, a living testament to what had been taken. Silence settled over Grafton. Not the silence of fear, but the weight of exhaustion and shared truth. Embers glowed where the stable had burned, a reminder that the night had been survived not by force, but by a radical act of listening. Among the weary townsfolk, Clara felt the burden of her family's legacy pressed down on her. Displacement, a lost child. Wealth now felt like a debt long unpaid. She looked to Naru as he tended his wounded shoulder, his face marked by fatigue and sorrow. She no longer saw a savior, but a man who chose peace over vengeance, understanding over destruction, even when blood was at stake. In the days that followed, Grafton began to mend. The stable was rebuilt, storefronts repaired, yet the town itself had changed. The old order once anchored to Clara's unchecked authority had fallen away. The settlers looked to Naru with respect earned, not feared. And to Clara they looked with a new mix of expectation and resolve. Her mansion ceased to be a fortress of isolation. It became a place of work, aid, organized resources, shared families supported. The work of reckoning had begun. She came to understand that the fortune she had inherited could become an instrument of repair rather than control. Clara sought out the elders of Naru's people, listening first, learning the long road of loss, and beginning the work of amends for Margaret Whitlock's sins. She committed her time and resources to setting things right, supporting displaced families, helping build schools and establishing honest trade with their communities. The coins she had once flipped in careless disdain now stayed in her pocket, a steady reminder of her blindness and a vow to live worthy of Naru's sacrifice. Naru, however, did not linger in Grafton as a celebrated hero. When the town stood steady again, when the danger had truly passed, He prepared to leave without ceremony. There were wounds to tend, some beneath the skin. Finding his brother only to watch him ride away, still tethered to old shadows, weighed on him. He needed the full truth of Boone, of the missing sibling of the child whose loss had ignited so much pain. His road, he knew, led toward reconciliation, toward stitching together a family torn apart. One quiet morning, as the sunrise brushed the sky with pale pink and gold, Naru saddled his horse. His bags were light. His heart was not. Clara stood at the edge of town. She offered him a heavy purse of gold, not payment, but provision for the journey, a wordless sign of trust. He took it with a nod, acknowledging the bridge they had built. He would seek his brother. He would seek the truth of Eli. He would not turn away. Years slipped by. Grafton grew not just repaired, but reshaped by shared responsibility and hard-earned respect. Clara Whitlock, once a distant heiress, became known for tireless work connecting settlers and tribes, for choosing justice over comfort. The Whitlock fortune, once divisive, turned outward, funding schools, fair markets, and repair. At the center of her purpose lay one promise: she never set down to find the lost child and finish the work her family had begun in harm. Then one bright afternoon, a lone rider appeared on the road. It was Naru, weathered, steadier, his eyes carrying a quiet peace. Beside him rode a boy of about 10 on a gentle pony, with Naru's intensity and Mara's unmistakable features. And behind them came Boone and Mara themselves, time-softened, bearing the marks of a long road toward healing. The child had been taken in after the chaos years before by a kind white family. Naru had followed faint trails and old stories, piecing together the truth until he reunited parents and son. He had negotiated more than peace between people. He had taught that strength lives in forgiveness, in listening, and the slow labor of building a shared future. The final moment held no spectacle. Boone dismounted and embraced his brother, no words, only understanding. Mara, her fierce gaze finally at rest, offered Clara a small, genuine smile. Eli ran to his parents, laughter lifting into the open air, pure, unguarded joy. The true shadow, it turned out, was never a man's heart. It was prejudice and misunderstanding, and the light that broke it was shared humanity. In a land that prized conquest, it was empathy, chosen vulnerability, and patient reconciliation that carved the truest path to redemption, proving that the deepest empires are built not on gold, but on family forgiveness and the stubborn hope of a better tomorrow. The desert, vast and unforgiving, had offered its lesson once more. Even the harshest ground can bloom when peace is planted and tended. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us where you're watching from. Leave a comment, and to catch the next adventure, subscribe to the channel. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover, visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.